Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to today's episode of TPR Live. We are going to be talking about direct and indirect objects today. So before we get started and talk about all the grammatical elements here, we're going to start as we always do with our warm-up. So grab something to write with, something to write on, and let's get started with the warm-up. So as usual, we're going to have the warm-up. We'll come back to the warm-up at the end of today's session, but we're not going to be looking for errors today. Instead, you're going to be identifying any direct and or indirect objects that you see in the 4 sentences on the screen. So go ahead and write down numbers 1 through 4, and you're going to go ahead and write down any direct and indirect objects you see. So number 1 says, Ali made a taco with delicious toppings. Number 2, Cynthia took the train to work. Number 3, he gave Sergio the ball. And number 4, Kaden baked a cake for her. So I'll leave this up for just a moment longer, and you can go ahead and write your answers down. And I see we have a question here. Someone's asking how long this will be. Probably about 25 to 30 minutes. And anyone who has a question while we're live, go ahead and feel free to type it in the chat box, and Rachel will go ahead and put it on the screen for me. So now let's take a look at our direct objects. So what is a direct object? Well, there are a few key things to keep in mind when you're dealing with direct objects. For one, a direct object tends to receive the action of the verb, whatever that verb does. And we'll see these in action in just a moment. A direct object is some kind of a noun or a pronoun, or it can be a noun clause, a noun phrase. There are different constructions that are possible. And usually, not always, but very often, you'll see that the direct object comes right after the verb. And finally, your direct object is going to go with a transitive verb. So an intransitive verb doesn't take a direct object. Okay, so what does all that mean? Well, let's see. First of all, what is the order? What is the sentence structure of a sentence that contains a direct object? Typically, it's going to be subject, verb, and then your direct object. So it's important to differentiate between a subject and a direct object because they both tend to be some kind of noun or pronoun, noun phrase, noun clause. But the subject is the thing that's doing the action, whereas the direct object is on the receiving end of the action. So let's take a look at an example of a sentence that has a direct object. Okay, Alex fed the cat. Very short, sweet, simple sentence here. Now, I'm going to show you a sentence diagram so you can see what that looks like. We're not going to go too much into sentence diagrams today, but I just want to provide a visual. So when you look here, we have subject here as Alex. Alex is the person feeding the cat, or she fed the cat in the past. So Alex is the subject, fed is the verb. So you can ask yourself, Alex fed what? Oh, she fed the cat. So cat is your direct object in the sentence. And the here is just the definite article. So Alex subject, fed verb, and cat is the direct object that gets the action. Let's take a look at a few more examples. So the cat licked its paw. So you want to ask yourself a series of questions when you're trying to figure out, well, what is this direct object? First, you say, well, what's the subject? In this case, what's doing the action? We have the cat is doing the action here. So we can put cat. Next, you want to say, well, what's the verb? What is the action in the sentence? In this case, we have licked. That's the verb. So we want to kind of figure out next, okay, so you got the subject, we got the verb. What is the direct object? Well, you can take the verb, in this case licked, and say verb what. So here we would say licked what? It licked its paw. So the direct object of this sentence is going to be paw. Let's take a look at another example. The cat chased the mouse. Okay, so the subject, same thing here, right? We have this cat is in the subject again. So we can put cat. And then the verb, what's the verb? In this case, chased. So now verb what chased what? The cat chased the mouse. So mouse in the sentence is going to be your direct object. And that's it. So when you have a simple sentence, it tends to be a lot easier to identify your direct objects. And if you're ever not sure, you're having some difficulty trying to find it, just ask yourself, to whom or to what does this verb correspond? Because these transitive verbs, they have to take something. You wouldn't say the cat chased. You have to have something come after that. So that's the transitive verb always has some kind of an object after it. Whereas an intransitive, like walk or talk, I can say I talk, I can say I walk. I don't need anything to come after those constructions. So they're intransitive. And some verbs can be transitive or intransitive. That's a whole nother thing to talk about for another day. But if you have any questions about this as I continue, just go ahead and type them in. Okay, so that's your direct object. Now let's take a look at indirect objects. So what are our indirect objects? An indirect object is the thing that receives the direct object, not the action. And we'll see a few examples of these as well. An indirect object, just like a direct object, can be a noun, a pronoun, a clause, a noun phrase, a noun clause, any of those different constructions. And a lot of times, not always, your indirect object is going to have the preposition to or for just in front of it. And it can come before or after the direct object, and we're going to see a few examples of them. So, what's the sentence structure? Typically, when we're dealing with the indirect object, we have the subject and then the verb and then the direct object. And oftentimes the indirect object will come after, but sometimes the direct and indirect object are switched. So here's our example. We're back to Alex feeding the cat again. So now Alex gave the food to the cat. We're pretty much saying the same thing as the original sample sentence, right? Alex fed the cat. Now we're just using different words to say the same thing. So Alex gave food to the cat. Okay, take a look here. Alex, again, is our subject. She is the one who gave our verb the food. So now food is what was given. She gave what? Gave food. So we have those first three things. And then again, you've got your definite article, the, down here. So what you want to ask now is who or what received that food? Oh, in this case, it's the cat that received the food. To the cat. So cat is going to be the indirect object here. And you see in this example, there's the word to, that preposition, in front of cat. Okay, so we have a question from Skylar. How might we see these, a question with these concepts presented on the ACT? So likely if you see something on the ACT or SAT, it's going to come down to pronouns, which we're going to look at in just a second. So I will show you and point out an example when I get to that slide. It's the next one coming up. Okay, so another example of an indirect object. The lady gave a plant to Estefania. Okay, so we start with doing the same thing here. We want to ask ourselves, what's the subject? What did the action? In this case, the lady. So let me go ahead and type here, lady. And again, we're going to ask ourselves, what's the verb? The action here is gave. And then, what's the direct object? So the lady gave what? She gave a plant. So we can go ahead and put plant. Let's type this, retype it up here. All right, it just got stuck on the line. There we go. Okay, so we've got our subject, we've got our verb, we've got our direct object, and now we want to ask ourselves who or what is receiving the direct object. In this case, it's Estefania. So she's going to be our person that's the indirect object. Okay, And when she's receiving the direct object, that means that she is also the indirect object. And I'm frozen here. There we go. So just like if you have difficulty just as you have difficulty finding your direct object, you can ask yourself some things. You can ask yourself regarding the indirect object, who or what is receiving this direct object. So just ask yourself that. All right, seems simple enough, right? And realistically, the ACT, SAT is probably not going to put it this straightforward and simply. But what you might see tested is pronouns that are used as objects, and that's where it can get really tricky. So if I said, he gave me $1, we can look here and see that me is a pronoun, right? Me. Gave what? Gave $1 to me. So in this case, actually, we can label our direct and indirect. So here, what did Guy give me? Guy gave me $1. So that's my direct object is $. And gave to whom? Gave me. So I'm indirect. You would never say Guy gave I, right? That sounds normal. We can hear it from our ear. But sometimes the ACT, SAT will trip things up a little bit. And you might see something like Guy gave Jared and I $1, or Guy gave Jared and me $1. That's the kind of thing you might see tested on the ACT or SAT. So is it me or I? Guy gave Jared and me, Jared and I. It would be and me, because in this case, it's the object. It's coming after that, the dollar thing. So let's write this down here. I'm gonna reveal a couple more things. So I'm gonna type it up here. And so Jared gave, and then, sorry, Guy gave. He gave Jared and me, Jared and I. On the ACT, this will be the portion that would be underlined, and you might see some other variations in your answer choices. So there's a couple ways to kind of test this out. So if this is the sentence that you were given on the ACT, you could just cross out the person's name in front of the me or the I, right? If I cross out Jared, then I say, Guy gave me. Guy gave I. You can hear it with your ear that it's going to be me. Does that make sense, Skylar, and anybody else? So basically, you want to make sure that you know which ones are your object pronouns and what objects do. So me, you, him, her, it, one, us, you, them. These things are always receiving something. The subject form would be I, you, he, she, it, one, we, you, and they. So remember, the subjects do the action and the objects receive the action. So we have the Guy gave me $1 sentence, and we could also switch the wording around and say Guy gave $1 to me. So it's the same thing. When you put the me before $1, you put the indirect object before the direct object, you don't have to have the preposition. But in the second case, you have your to before the me. So these me's are indirect objects in both cases because I'm getting the $. But me can also be used as a direct object. So Angel drove me to the store. Drove what? Drove me. So now I am the direct object in this case. And again, we wouldn't say Angel drove I. And we wouldn't say Angel drove they. We would say Angel drove them. Okay, so again, just memorize these object pronouns and know what they do, and you won't get tripped up by the ACT or SAT in the English and writing and language sections. Okay, so now you go ahead and get a chance to identify some objects, both indirect and direct. So let's take a look at the first sentence. We've got Ravi baked them a pie. Okay, so here are some questions that you can ask yourself. Again, we've been doing this. What's the subject? In this case, Robbie is the subject, right? Robbie did the action. So we're asking ourselves, what's the verb? The action or verb is baked. Robbie baked what? Did Robbie bake them or Robbie bake a pie? Hopefully it was a pie. So in this case, Robbie baked a pie. That's going to be your direct object. And then if you're not sure if there is an indirect, you want to say, okay, is someone or something receiving something? Yeah, them. So they are getting this pie. So in this case, them, which is your object pronoun, is receiving the pie. All right, let's take a look at another one. Addie bought shoes for her daughter. So you can go through the questions again here. What's your subject? Who is doing the action? Here we have Addie. And what is the action? Bought. Bought is our verb. Addie bought what? Addie bought the shoes or Addie bought her daughter? In this case, she bought the shoes. So Addie bought the shoes is your direct object. That should be a D. It looks a little bit like an O. And is someone or something getting those shoes? Well, yeah, her daughter's getting them. They're for her daughter. And just a side note to kind of go back to the ACT question, just as I mentioned earlier, the 2 and the 4 can give you an indication that you're dealing with an indirect object. So 2 can that let you know, oh, if I see a 2 or a 4, that means I want to use the object pronoun. Okay, next one. Mr. Jensen gave Lizette a high score. So let's break it down. What's the subject? We've got Mr. Jensen doing the action. And what did he do? He gave. Gave what? What is it that he gave? He gave a high score. And did somebody get that high score? Yes, Lizette. So you might be noticing some patterns. Some verbs tend to take the direct object and indirect object. So gave. I gave money. If I said I gave money, you would say to whom or for what. So you kind of have to, you need something there. You don't always need it. I could say I gave blood, for example, and it would be implied that I was really donating blood. So just kind of noticing these things and being aware of what might show up on your standardized tests. Next sentence here. So Jamie walks slowly to the store. What's the subject? Who's doing the action? In this case, it's Jamie. And what's the verb? We have walked. So, is someone or something receiving that action? Well, let's look at what else is going on here. We've got slowly to the store. So we see a to, which is that preposition I mentioned earlier. But is the store getting something? Jamie walked what? Jamie walked slowly, right? But slowly is the adverb describing how Jamie walked. So that's not a direct object. To the store, that's a prepositional phrase. So that's saying, where did Jamie walk to? Jamie walked to the store. So in this sentence, there's actually not a direct or indirect object going on here. So not every sentence has these objects. So let's take a look at one more. Martina texted him frantically. Okay, what's our subject? Martina. And what is it that Martina did? She texted. Who texted what? Or texted whom? in this case, him. So him is your direct object, because that's what's being texted. And then frantically is just describing how she texted him. So frantically is your adverb. You could make this sentence, you could rewrite it to say, Martina texted a message to him frantically. If we'd said that, Martina and texted would still be the same, your subject and verb, but a message would become your direct object because texted what? Texted a message, and then to or for whom, it would be to or for him. Okay, any questions at this point from anybody? We are coming toward the end here. I'm gonna give you the answers for our initial warm-up in just a moment. So now is the time to type in any questions. And here we go back to the initial question. So number 1, Ali made a taco with delicious toppings. What is the direct and or indirect object, if any, of this sentence? What did you guys put? So this sentence has a direct object, and your direct object is going to be taco. Okay? If you ask yourself, what's the subject, what's the verb? You've got Ali as the subject, made as the verb, and a taco. Taco is your direct object. With delicious toppings is a prepositional phrase. If you said, Ali made a taco with delicious toppings for his dog, for example, hopefully it's doggy friendly, but for his dog, in that case, his dog would be the indirect object receiving that taco. Okay, and I see another question from Skylar here. So could you go over the pronouns you would use if they're receiving or giving the action? Sure, I'll go over that as soon as I finish going over these last couple of examples here. So number 1, the only object was taco, and that's the direct object. Number 2, Cynthia took the train to work. What's your subject? Cynthia. Verb is took. And took what? Took the train. So train is the direct object. We have the word to, the preposition, but it's not to a person or a thing. It's a prepositional phrase here. This is just describing the direction that the train went, so it's not an indirect object. Number 3, he gave Sergio the ball. So your subject is he, gave is your verb, gave what? Here, gave what, gave the ball. So the ball is your direct object. And did somebody get it? Yes, Sergio got the ball. So Sergio is indirect. Okay, and then number 4, Kaden baked a cake for her. Subject, Kaden. Verb, baked. Baked what? Baked a cake. So cake is the direct object. And did somebody get it? We don't know who her is, but her is a person. So her would be your indirect object. Okay, so these sentences are all in past tense, and a lot of them today have been in past tense. The tense has nothing to do with it. It can be any tense. You can have direct objects and indirect objects in the future perfect progressive or whatever tense you want. It just so happens that these examples are all in the past tense. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to those pronouns and receiving or giving the action. So let me write on top of, I'm going to clear myself a little space here so you can see the list as I'm going. And I just need to draw a little box over our other examples. So if we saw a sentence on the ACT or SAT that said something like, Teacher assigned a lot of homework to Sarah and me, or Sarah and I. So here's another example where you have to figure out which kind of pronoun it is, whether you use the object or the subject. So a lot of people misuse the me versus the I because for some reason we are always told, no, it's and I, it's and I. But sometimes it's and me. It's only and I when the thing, the pronoun, is the subject of the sentence. So in this case, the teacher assigned, teacher is your subject, assigned is the verb, and assigned what? Oh, that's supposed to say a lot of homework. I just realized I didn't write homework. There we go. To Sarah and me. Assigned what? Assigned homework. That's the direct object. And to Sarah and me. You're going to have to say me in this case because me is the object. Again, you can eliminate the Sarah part and say the teacher assigned a lot of homework to I or to me. And most likely you would know that it's going to be the to me. We could change this up and maybe it said the teacher assigned a lot of homework to Sarah and they or to Sarah and them. Since it's doing the same thing, it's going to act as an indirect object here. It would be and them. You wouldn't say and they. But we can make the sentence, we can use Sarah and I. Sarah and I did a lot of homework. So now what's doing the action? Sarah's doing the action, I'm doing the action, so we want to use the subject pronoun I. And the same thing, if it wasn't an I here, if you had something else, Sarah and he did a lot of homework. Sounds a little bit funny, but he did the homework. You wouldn't say him did the homework, right? That sounds funny when you say it alone. So the best trick is often to just cross out anything else that's there if there's another name with that pronoun. Does that make sense, Skylar? I'll hang tight to see if we have any further questions there. If not, then we'll wrap this up in just a moment. But anyone who tunes in later, you can feel free to type a question in the comments and we're happy to answer you. But definitely the object pronouns is the trickiest part of your indirect and direct objects. The SAT and ACT are not going to ask you, hey, can you identify the direct and indirect objects? That's not how it's going to be. It's going to be some little tricky thing hidden in there. And as long as you know your rules and your different types of pronouns, your subject versus your object pronouns, and you can just look up any chart that has all of your pronouns and just make sure you've got them memorized, you'll be in great shape. Okay. All right. Awesome, Skylar. Okay, everybody. Well, that is it for today. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you next time.